right, things are slowing down now. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kathy Grunling. I am here representing the Collaboration and Multidisciplinary Team Science arm of the Georgia CTSA. Today we're going to have a Blue Sky group focused on exercise and medicine. So for those of you who haven't joined one of these before, Blue Sky groups are unstructured. It's really meant to be a discussion of potential possible collaborations in this general area. So we'll open the discussion with our two speakers. We'll only spend 5 or 10 minutes introducing the field. I'll introduce them in a second. And then we're going to ask each of you to tell us about your research, just a minute or so, what your area of research is, and have a discussion then about what you heard, where you think there might be collaboration opportunities. So this is meant to be fun and interactive. And so please, share with us your experience, learn from the others that you hear about. Feel free to ask questions. And I want to tell you one more thing, and then I'm going to introduce the speakers. Could you do the next slide, please, Gray? We have started a collaboration pilot grant to try to help some of our newly formed collaborations get off the ground. It's not much money. It's only about $1,500, but it's an opportunity for you to get together with people that you meet in this meeting and put together a proposal for where your collaboration might go. Just keep that in mind if you're interested at the end of this meeting in applying for a collaboration pilot grant. So our speakers today are Joe Nocera, who's an associate professor in the Department of Neurology and Rehabilitation Medicine at Emory. His research is focused on the intersection of physical and cognitive functioning, and he's been looking at longitudinal changes in mobility and executive functions during aging, looking at exercise as an intervention. Our second speaker is Felipe Labello. He is an associate professor of global health in the Emory Global Diabetes Research Center, and interestingly, director of the Exercises Medicine Global Research and Collaboration Center. So his interests are in chronic disease prevention, implementation science, and health and population health. So they will just get us started. So I'll turn it over to Joe, and thanks very much to both of you for participating.
All right, thank you, Dr. Greenling, for that introduction. Get my screen share going here. All right. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you all about this. It's certainly an area of interest and passion of mine. So always excited by new collaborations and opportunities. So looking forward to the discussion. One thing I wanted to start with in this brief intro is just a few common misconceptions when it comes to exercise, particularly from when we think about funding agencies. I think sometimes many of us, we might be a little bit hesitant to apply for a particular award because that agency, they're not interested in exercise. The reviewers tell me that we already, people don't exercise, so what's the point of studying it? Well, that's actually not, supported by the literature. So approximately 1 in 4 older adults, 50 and older, are inactive. So that's 25%. So if we look at that from the positive standpoint, that means 75% of older adults are active. Obviously, those with more than one chronic disease tend to be more sedentary. But the issue with this is we still have a large percentage of the older adult population that is inactive, and that puts 31 million adults at risk of heart disease, diabetes, cancers. There's also a lot of other comorbidities associated with this sedentary lifestyle. So it's a tremendous opportunity. So to think that, people don't exercise, well, we find in our work that they will, given the opportunity. Most people given an opportunity, facilities, knowledge about how to exercise, they will indeed exercise. So again, opportunity to find better ways to disseminate, and also opportunity to understand mechanism a little bit better. Another common misconception I hear when it comes to, sometimes funding agencies or people that maybe are outside the field but interested in studying is, we already, the funding agencies are telling me we already know that exercise is good. There's nothing left to be studied. I'm sure some of you have seen this figure before. And what I just want to highlight here is, when we talk about the periphery, yeah, sure, there's a lot that's been studied over the last so many decades, and we've learned a ton, but there's still a lot to learn, and particularly when we think about the central nervous system. So, the red boxes have neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. These are just kind of ways of saying that we know that there is a huge benefit of exercise when it comes to brain health, but that we're mechanistically, we have no idea at this point. BDNF is often talked about, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, but there's a whole lot that needs to be studied from the standpoint of understanding why exactly exercise is good for us. So that is exactly why the center that I'm fortunate enough to be the interim executive director for, Center for Visual and Neurocognitive Rehabilitation at the VA, we have an exercise core. The mission of the exercise core is to understand mechanisms involved in exercise-induced change and function. For me, it's primarily looking at central nervous system function, but certainly we're always interested in better understanding the impact of exercise in the periphery. And then, kind of what I talked about earlier is we're also very interested in how can we disseminate these successful interventions? How can we get these out to a broader, community, individuals in rural areas? How can we get more people active is really a huge focus of our core. This is kind of an exhaustive slide. Certainly don't want you to read it all, but and I certainly don't want to come across like these are all my studies. I'm just really fortunate enough to collaborate with a lot of great people. In red is populations that we've studied in the exercise core, and then in blue is the funding mechanism. So we do a lot in aging, chronic kidney disease, mild cognitive impairment, stroke, age-related macular degeneration is a new award that we just got, which is really exciting. Parkinson's disease, cancer, and then even some impaired fasting glucose. So numerous different populations, numerous different outcomes and targets. But the point here was just to highlight that the physical exercise core, which spans both the Atlanta VA and Emory, is really active and really interested in numerous different types of exercise approaches, as well as different types of populations. So when it comes to potential opportunities out there, the NIH, right under research priorities on their website, has physical activity listed as one of the research priorities of interest for researchers. So there are generic calls that physical activity and exercise can fit under. There's also more specific calls. Here's just a few examples that I pulled. So the first one is looking at health disparities in Alzheimer's disease, both with R21 and R01 mechanisms. You can see the next one, development of validation of devices or electronic systems to monitor or enhance mind and body interventions. There's a huge area here for us to better understand, what people look like when they're out in the world. So we have ongoing exercise intervention trials, both VA and Emory, and we're pretty successful at targeting, increased aerobic fitness or strength, for example, but that's only a few times a week for maybe an hour. And we really don't do a good job of monitoring what people are doing outside in their normal environment because it's difficult. Obviously with technology and the advancement of wearables, we're getting better here, but there's still tremendous opportunity if that's of interest to folks on the call. And the last one here that I just pulled was interventions to address cardiometabolic risk factors in populations that experience health disparities. So just a few examples, there's numerous more. If you go under research priorities or NIH. On the VA side, I always like to promote VA research. I've been given a tremendous opportunity through the VA. So much of my work is funded through R&D. This isn't the only service line that funds research, but this is one that funds quite a bit of exercise studies. So it's integrates clinical, preclinical, and applied rehab research to enable translation, clinical practice to improve the health and well-being of veterans. And you'll notice it always says, and it also says, and the nation. These funded studies do target veterans, but there are opportunities to study non-veterans as well through the VA. So there are a few different generic calls. There are career development programs. If you have, postdocs, this is a tremendous opportunity. Career Development Award 1, Career Development Award 2. These are mentored awards. The Merit Award to the VA, this is very similar to an NIH R01, and then Aspire Award would be similar to R03 or R21. And these, again, are kind of generic calls focused on health and well-being of veterans, but certainly interested in exercise studies. So in terms of areas, I got a thank Dr. Falk, who's on the call, I saw, for sending this along because it was quite timely. This came out just about a week or two ago. Much of my work is in aging, so I'm particularly drawn to this, but there's certainly other opportunities within other populations outside of aging and geriatric medicine when it comes to exercise, but urgent need for integrating physical exercise into geriatric medicine, the call to action. So they highlighted 3 opportunities I think are spot on. Looking at hallmarks of aging and personalized exercise recommendations. And again, when it comes to that personalized exercise, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for wearables, better understand what people's activity levels are and adapt programs specific to them. Importance of physical activity for healthy aging and frailty prevention. Again, a huge area of interest. There are older adults that are aging very healthy, and to understand how exercise fits into that is critical. And then frailty prevention, obviously, as our population continues to age. And then this last one is really interesting for me because I always get the question when I present on exercise and brain health. People usually ask, well, what about, it's usually in the context of aerobic exercise. And so people are always asking, well, what about muscle strength? And we certainly promote muscle strengthening exercises for older adults. But really the evidence is in terms of optimal dose for older adults to prevent or treat disability and disease is currently unknown. So just areas that I think are urgently need to be studied, and I think there's tremendous opportunity out there. So that was quick, I know, but I'm very, very interested in collaboration. That's my email. I think it'll be on this call as well, but I don't want to take up too much more time because I want to turn it over to Dr. Lobello.
Thank you, Joe. Felipe?
Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Felipe Lobello, and thanks for joining us in this Blue Sky group. It's always a pleasure for me to connect with other researchers across Atlanta and people interested in physical activity and health. I've been at Emory for about 6 years, and I also wear a hat as I'm part-time with Kaiser Permanente, Georgia. I'm the director for epidemiology and public health there. And I mentioned that because this topic of exercise medicine is sort of obviously goes beyond Emory, but we have sort of collaborations with integrated healthcare systems and different research institutions that probably have a little bit more of experience and sort of years trying to implement these type of approaches. So I don't have any slides, and sorry, there's a little bit of a background noise here. But I'm going to give you sort of like a little bit of an overview of what I do. So my focus is more on the implementation aspect of exercises medicine. So, Joe walked you through a little bit more of the mechanistic and the, why we want to better study the effects of exercise. My focus is a little bit more on how do we implement what we already know in different clinical populations, particularly for primary care and prevention strategies. So within the Emory sort of umbrella in the School of Public Health, we have the Global Diabetes Research Center that sort of has the experience and funding and critical mass of different groups of investigators across Emory focusing on diabetes, and within that, obviously, physical activity is a big part of it. And when I came to Emory, one of my sort of tasks was to try to coalesce more research around this area, particularly again on the implementation side, and the American College of Sports Medicine Exercises Medicine Initiative, which probably some of you have heard. But it's essentially this idea of making physical activity a vital sign in healthcare, so that patients not only get promoted in terms of physical activity and ask about their physical activity levels, but we also have a system around the practice and the delivery of care where that actually happens. And sort of in collaboration with ACSM and different healthcare systems, we've sort of implemented different clinical trials and research studies showing that, with the right support and the right sort of workflow and people, you can implement physical activity in a healthcare system. We were able to create the physical activity vital sign in 2019, 2020 in the Emory-Sarner medical record. We have now transitioned. So I'm not sure what the current status of the physical activity vital sign is, but since Epic has had it for a while, I'm hoping that we can sort of find it and make sure that it's continued to be implemented. So that's one area that I think should be of interest for everyone, because having that data for all different clinical populations is going to be instrumental in thinking about potential interventions and finding gaps, populations that are not being assessed, or there's not enough physical activity promotion occurring. And then we have sort of like certain studies that have focused more on actual ways of getting physical activity into the fabric of healthcare delivery. So one of the areas I'm most interested is diabetes prevention. And we have the National Diabetes Prevention Program, which obviously includes a physical activity component. The problem is that, despite this evidence being, 25-year-old evidence, and despite the fact that we have CDC and a national program, the participation in diabetes prevention is still very, very limited. Out of the 100 million adults that are potentially eligible for the DPP, no one really has a specific number, but I don't think that more than 1 or 2 million adults have participated. And part of it is because the program itself was sort of created with certain characteristics in mind that may not appeal for everyone or to everyone. There's passive learning, doing physical activity on your own, changing your diet. And although the program is, evidence-based, we try to do adaptations to see if, different components of the program can be targeted to different populations, particularly at high risk. So we've experimented with using team sports to try to target younger populations that typically don't get interested in participation in these types of prevention programs, particularly men. So we have a soccer diabetes prevention program for Hispanic men that we piloted here in Atlanta with magnificent results showing that you can get these men to participate in DPP. They will lose weight, they will exercise, and they will engage in a prevention program. So, we have those experiences. We've also finished one recently at Kaiser Permanente using basketball to, again, promote diabetes prevention and get people engaged in the idea of a prevention program. And essentially, the team sport here is a hook to get people engaged, to be sort of like, socially invested in a program, in an activity that they ideally like to do. But really the core of the program is an evidence-based lifestyle change. So that's sort of like, those are, some of the areas that I'm been working on and I'm interested, and I'm also happy to think about potential connections of institutions or people in different institutions. I've seen familiar faces here like Linda and others, and I think even though this idea of exercise medicine has been in discussion for 5 to 10 years, we still have a lot of work to do to actually make it happen. I want to end with sort of like some recent news that the National Physical Activity Alliance, which is sort of the main advocacy group for implementation of physical activity in the US, has been working hard in collaboration with the American Heart Association and other entities to make the physical activity vital sign sort of part of the HL7 sort of language for healthcare, essentially making it so that any electronic medical record system can include not only the questions about physical activity, but also data integration and data transferability, so that again we actually find consistent data as Joe was mentioning, it's one thing to invite people to exercise with us in a lab for 2 or 3 times a week for 8 months. Another thing to know what people are doing in the community and specifically how that relates to risk factors or specific diseases or conditions. And aging obviously is a very important one. Diabetes is an important one, but as you all know, there's a long laundry list of clinical populations and areas that exercise and physical activity has a tremendous impact. So let me stop there and hopefully open it for some dialogue, conversation, and to hear more about others in the panel. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Felipe. So what we usually do now is ask each of you just to tell us in 30 seconds or less what your research is related to exercise as medicine. And that way we have a better idea of where there might be room for collaboration. And then we'll have a more general discussion about what the opportunities are, where you see connections. So listen carefully, make a note of who you'd like to go back and talk with. So I'm just going to go by the order I see you on my screen and start with Hanjun.
Hi, Hanjung Jo, professor of biomedical engineering. I'm a mechanobiologist. I study how blood flow regulates vascular biology and vascular disease and heart valve disease. So actually, I study the opposite of exercise or lack of exercise. So I've been actually very interested in looking at the effect of exercise to reverse the bad blood flow conditions that causes the disease. So as a mechanobiologist, I'm very interested in understanding the mechanisms by which the reversal of blood flow due to exercise actually could induce some changes in vascular cells or biology of cells to understand the mechanisms. And I'm actually interested in both clinical samples as well as animal models, especially if any of you are doing those kind of studies. I would be really interested in working with the team.
Thanks, Hanjun. Melinda?
Oh, hi, everyone. I'm Mindy Millard Stafford. I'm professor in biological sciences at Georgia Tech, and I'm an exercise physiologist. Been here almost 4 decades. We basically do human intervention work with the effects of exercise, but often how we can impact human performance. And I invited my current PhD student who's interested now in more of the mood responses and understanding sedentary behavior and what are some of the things that stratify people, but also more related to the brain and the mood. So that's Brian Hack, who you might see. So when his turn comes up, you understand one of my motivations for inviting him today. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump to Brian and let him chime in on that.
Yes, sure. Yes. So I'm her student, and yeah, I'm just essentially just to reiterate what she was saying, interested essentially in looking at whether the kind of central activity in the brain is a factor implicating like a mood response difference between people who are active and are not active, and whether that can kind of be a possible explanation for physical inactivity.
Thank you, Brian. Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Boatwright, and the exercise work we're looking at is in my Emory lab. We're looking at the effects of treadmill and wheel running in models of retinal degeneration, models of light-induced retinal degeneration, and also genetic models of retinitis pigmentosa. And of course, since it's animal models, we're looking at underlying mechanism that may be mediating the protective effects we see, which the protective effects are actually quite significant, surprisingly so. And then in my VA lab, Joe Nocera and I are looking at the effects of Joe's spin cycling regimen in age-related macular degeneration patients, and also in aged cohorts in general. And there, of course, we're doing blood draws and looking at different biomarkers for exercise effects. And we're very interested in increasing our capabilities with that and looking at circulating biomarkers, whether it's in blood or tears or saliva. Thank you.
Fascinating. I do want to know what the mechanism is for exercise improving retinal degeneration. Do you know yet?
Well, not surprisingly, it absolutely requires an intact BDNF signal transduction pathway. We see increases in local BDNF levels in the retina, but more importantly, when we pre-dose animals with a TrkB antagonist, we lose the protective effects of exercise. So that's a fairly straightforward story, but BDNF is certainly not the only thing that's important here.
Interesting. Lindy.
Hi, so I'm at the School of Nursing Emeritus, and I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner interested in population mental health. We have 2 randomized controlled trials published that show that by training people in somatic awareness, it increases their sense of well-being and reduces secondary traumatic stress. So it's all about interoception or body awareness. And I'm wondering about the fact that when people exercise, they will always be paying attention to body sensations. So that could be a connection there. But I'd be glad to communicate with anybody. I'm very interested in collaboration.
Thank you. Eric is coming back, right? We'll come back to her. Nancy. Nancy Kuttner. Seem to have lost her. Zohair, I don't see your full name, sorry. Are you with us? Not sure that is either. George. Oh. Sorry, did you say something?
Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
There we go, Nancy.
Yeah, I think I'm here now. Thank you. My work has been in the renal disease population, and I know that a lot of very good work is going on here at Emory now in that area. But we particularly focused in cohort studies on people undergoing chronic dialysis, and we're able to show that when you follow people over time, there was a very impressive reduction in their levels of inflammation compared to people with lower levels of activity. So I've been very hopeful that at some point there would be interest, since Emory is involved with several dialysis clinics locally, that a number of these research possibilities could be followed up and have done, some effort, have been involved in some efforts to write proposals in this area. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I guess my main question is the possibility of having more institutional support, just in terms of this being a clinical practice initiative and emphasis.
It might be a little bit outside of scope for this group, but if we have clinicians on the call, certainly something to think about. George, who was actually showing us exercise while he popped on before, what we should all be doing.
That's right. I'm gotta make sure I get my steps in instead of sitting at my desk all day, but I'll stop here so I don't make people dizzy and nauseous by bouncing up and down. So I'm George Folk, the new director of the physical therapy program here at Emory. I've been here almost a year now. And so my area of research and interest as a physical therapist obviously is helping people increase their movement and through exercise and other interventions. Currently, looking at the impact of sleep and activity on recovery after stroke. So sleep is a rather new area for me, but I think that's a really ripe area. There's a lot of early research now of how sleep and activity interact and how one can benefit the other. Even some more recent research where previously we thought getting exercise too close to sleep would disturb your sleep, but actually can help improve your sleep. And also I've done a lot of work using wearables. Joe mentioned finding out what people really do in the community. So I have a pretty extensive background in developing and using activity monitors to monitor sleep and exercise and activity levels, and trying to use those to provide feedback as well to increase their activity levels. So being new here, I'm really interested in meeting people and hopefully collaborating. Thanks.
Cool, thanks. So Hera, Amen, I want to make sure you have a chance if you're there, or if I'm totally butchering your name. Okay, Sean.
Hello, I'm Sean. I'm a clinical research coordinator with the Grady Trauma Project out of the School of Psychology. We study PTSD in civilian populations. And I've been a swim coach for a long time and a personal trainer and a yoga instructor. I'm very much interested in the effects of exercise as an ancillary treatment for PTSD. So I'm very interested in hearing what everybody has to say.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Sarah?
Hey, thank you for organizing this. So my work is around overall overarching purpose of how we can better integrate the family into the rehab process after stroke. And I initially had started developing an intervention that was a web-based family education intervention that supported engagement of the care partner in upper extremity rehab in the home. And I've shifted, I'm just finishing up a study looking at focusing on gait. And so I think my exploration is thinking of ways in which we can support physical activity with both the care partner and stroke survivor, and even in other diagnoses as well. But looking at how do you create more family-centered goals around physical activity, and using this collaborative problem solving to navigate that physical activity and improvement.
Yeah, thank you. Karen? Karen, if you're there, you're muted.
Hi, Karen Lindsley with the Georgia CTSA, and I'm with the Coordinating Center and Regulatory Knowledge. And I just felt this group was so valuable. I wanted to kind of drop in and eavesdrop on you and let you know if you have sometimes specific questions that maybe the Georgia CTSA could help you with, reach out to me. I'm with the Coordinating Center. And I'm not going to do a big presentation like these great blue skies, but it would be a one-on-one question where you're looking for an expert or a collaborator or a partner or a resource in a very specific area related to health and exercise. And I would work behind the scenes to link that for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Gail?
Hi, I'm with Georgia CTSA at Morehouse School of Medicine, and I don't have any particular interest except the overall interest in exercise as it relates to improving health overall, and wanted to hear what kinds of research and what kind of potential partners there are in some areas. So thank you.
Thank you. Laura. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Laura Hansen, and I'm an assistant professor in cardiology at Emory. So my lab studies peripheral artery disease, looking at mostly the treatment and potential treatment through looking at the angiogenesis and arteriogenesis processes. And we've become really interested in exercise because supervised exercise therapy is one of the effective treatments for these patient populations. And so my work is trying to really understand the mechanisms by how it works. I'm studying some of the muscle cells and looking at their interaction with the vascular cells and things like that. And I do it primarily through animal models, mouse models, but I have a collaboration elsewhere with a vascular surgeon. So I get some human patient samples pre and post exercise therapy of PAD patients. So.
Great, thank you. Sakila. Sakila, if you are here, you're muted. All right, let's move on to Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Frediani. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Nursing. Felipe pretty much covered most of my interests since we work together a lot. But I am also interested in weight neutral approaches to healthcare. So I'm a registered dietitian and exercise physiologist by training. So looking at ways that we can improve the healthcare experience for people in bigger bodies by encouraging specific behaviors instead of just weight loss. So specific behaviors in eating, but also in physical activity and movement.
Thank you. All right, I think, did I miss anybody? So Sakila. Okay, so you all heard the same thing I did. So what themes have you heard? What have you heard that was exciting or interesting you'd like to follow up on? In a minute, I'm going to put Joe and Felipe on the spot.
I have some notes here.
Hello.
And I'll just
wait just one second. We have Sakila. She came alive.
Yes, excuse me. I'm sorry. I just cut off a little bit. That's why. I'm a clinical research coordinator working with Dr. Megha Shah at Family Medicine. We are working for South Asian community for lifestyle modification and physical activity, how it can improve the diabetes for South Asian community. Our project name is Dream Atlanta. And under that umbrella, we are working for the family also, like, better together, how we can involve family. So now we are doing better together, Dream Atlanta. Like this is like diabetes research education and action for minorities. And we are very much interested also about how exercise and lifestyle can improve diabetes management and hypertension management. Thank you.
Thanks, Sakila. Okay, Joe, I'll go back to you.
All right. Thank you. Well, really interesting to hear about everyone's work, and I just jotted some notes down while people were talking. I don't know if the format of this, but I'll just go down my list here and read it off, and hopefully we can connect. So Hanjong Joe, blood flow and exercise. So I'm about halfway through a merit where we're looking at cerebral vascular activity in older adults that undergo a 12-week exercise intervention. So would love to chat, tell you more about that. Mindy and Brian, mood, depression, Vanetta Dotson, I'm sure at some point you all have, I've worked with her since I was in Florida over 10 years ago. She's incredible, does brain imaging, but a lot with depression and mood, great collaborator. So we should chat, and I would love to connect you all with her. Nancy, CKD, Jeannie Park here at Emory, her and I work on has an R01 that I'm on, as well as a VA merit, looking at chronic kidney disease and the impact of exercise on a whole host of outcomes. So I'm sure there's some connections there. George, great to hear that you were done some with sleep and activity monitoring, because we tried to send our folks that are in our exercise program home with these monitors that they would wear at night. There were these giant headbands, and they came back and half of them said they were about to throw it out on 285 because it was so frustrating. We got enough data to do a publication, but the fact is we need to know more about what happens with sleep when we put these folks through our interventions. Pretty much every time I show positive results on cognition with exercise, somebody raise their hand, said, how you know they're just not sleeping better? And I say, I don't. That could be it. So would love to talk more. Sean, yoga, PTSD. I think you probably work with Ginny over at the Dr. Stevenson at your facility there. So yoga is one thing that we've wanted to use as sort of I don't want to say control, because I know it has a great effect, but sort of comparator to some of the aerobic exercise stuff that we're doing. So we'd love to chat more. Sarah, MCI, or you mentioned stroke and caregivers, just submitted an application where we're trying to implement exercise virtually to patients with MCI and their caregivers. So the idea is that they'd exercise together from the home. It was favorably scored the first time, and we had to resubmit, so fingers crossed, but would love to talk more. And then Laura, PAD. I am a mentor for Arash Harzan, who is implementing virtual exercise for patients with PAD here at the VA. He's also in cardiology at Emory, and absolutely would not mind connecting you all and being part of that conversation.
Joe, what's virtual exercise? You mean exercise that's done through Zoom?
Remote, yeah, Zoom sometimes, often Zoom. Some have their own platforms. Arash's program, actually, they have their own platform where they're implementing exercise virtually.
I was just thinking about virtual exercise. Do you have an avatar that exercises or something? I was trying to figure that out.
We have a couple programs right now that are doing Zoom, where the trainer is essentially on this side, right? Me, for example. So there's a GeroFit program, which is a clinical implementation program. It's not research within the VA. It's been around for about 30 years. And every Wednesday morning, I teach one of those classes virtually. And it's me in front of the camera. There's usually 6 to 8 veterans on the other side, so I can see them, observe for safety. There, things have happened. This is a nationwide program. So it's probably in the thousands of veterans at this point. So things have happened, but overall, it's really safe as long as you're able to monitor and see what they're doing. Most of them, particularly the ones that are a little more high risk, somebody has to be at the home with them while they're exercising in case they were to fall or something. But we can successfully implement virtually, and we've gotten a lot better over the last few years for obvious reasons.
Yeah, there are some advantages to the pandemic, and I think the discovery of Zoom is one of them. Some days I think the discovery of Zoom is not so great after all. Zoom.
The virtual outreach, or the rural outreach, particularly with a lot of folks, particularly in Georgia, that we just wouldn't typically have access to. But with the virtual implementation of exercise, we've been able to reach a lot of remote veterans, for example, but even non-veterans as well.
I think, keep that in mind, because the Georgia CTSA has a big emphasis on rural health. And so I think, if you have connections in that regard, let us know about them. Maybe Aaron can connect you with other people who have access to rural populations. So, for example, the CTSA part at UGA is connected with the cooperative extension. And the cooperative extension has people on the ground in small towns in Georgia. So if you're looking to connect with rural health, that is part of your research program, definitely connect with the Georgia CTSA, because we can connect you to opportunities that way. So thank you, Jen. That was a really nice summary. You had everything I had on my list too. So what else did all of you hear that, where you think not only are there opportunities to collaborate, but what are the real burning questions in the field? So I heard, as the whole explanation sleep, I've heard mechanism, common mechanisms. I've heard the challenges of implementation. But what do you think are the things where a collaborative approach would be helpful?
I'll take a stab at that to start. I think it's important to kind of look at the whole picture. Because I think it was Jennifer, right, mentioned like diet and nutrition. So I think in sleep and exercise and activity, I think, again, we don't know enough about, maybe we know a little bit about how each of these individual things work to improve health. But in terms of how they all work in combination, we don't really know much about that. And so I think it'd be interesting to look at, combining expertise and looking all the way down from a mechanistic level, as many of the people here do, and then carrying that out all to the population level of, trying to understand how these different intervention and health benefit, health interventions benefit the overall person.
Yeah, I appreciated the connection between, or the mediator, I guess, of sleep and cognition and physical activity. I'm starting a kids study in soccer in the fall, and NIH doesn't apparently interested in physical activity in kids unless you go either the obesity route, which I'm more of a weight neutral person, or you go the mental health route. So we were looking at, resilience and cognition, and sleep is something that we could easily measure, at least, subjectively, through the parents. So that was a good idea. Thank you.
One thing that I would like to bring is that when we talk about mechanisms, I think exercise or physical activity affects most of our organ systems, and also mental health as well, and sleep as well. And I think one of the really state-of-the-art technology that we may all think about is that in all of your clinical samples or animal models, etc., I think this modern state-of-the-art omics technology, especially single-cell genomics and single-cell proteomics, metabolomics, etc., I think if we can think about combining those really state-of-the-art technologies, there may be some ways to work together across different organ systems and models and different clinical conditions to find some common mechanisms. And by working together, there may be some ways to really accelerate the progress of the discovery.
And I give a shout out to Hanju because he's the expert on omics. Omics apply to anything cardiovascular, at least. Definitely the expert.
So I know, Jeff, we spoke many years ago.
Yep.
And maybe it's time to get back to some work.
Yeah, now that we've convinced certain study sections that this is worth funding, yeah. So, and that's it. Actually, the omics idea across this group was something I was going to bring up, because, as you say, that it doesn't have to be organ specific or even exercise regimen specific. And as you know, Hanju, the devil's in the details about how you actually do the sampling, and kind of when in the exercise regimen, what are the goals of each study. But yeah, taking all of that into account, I still think that's a very natural place for collaboration for a group like this.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we have a project that we're starting to get IRB approval for a mindfulness intervention for long COVID patients with depression. And one of the associated outcomes that we are going to be looking at are single cell, gene expression, working with Bazine Manoj, who's I think also recently moved to Emory. So, I feel that, and this always happens, when I moved to Emory 5 or 6 years ago, and I started connecting with Mindy and Jennifer. We started having sort of like this quarterly meetings that we call the Physical Activity Research Interest Group. But it's always hard to sustain those unless there is a specific, grant that you're trying to get, or, you have seed funding, like other groups across Emory have. Many of us in the call work on that Big Peach grant that we didn't get funded, that would have looked into, a lot of the mechanistic stuff. But maybe we can think about it in a little bit of a different way and look at how other groups that collaborate across Emory, or even across different Atlanta institutions, have gotten a little bit of seed funding to get things started. I'm thinking about the climate and health group that recently received some startup funding to sort of essentially have the scaffolding of organizing these meetings, know who is working on what are the lab research interests and capacity, so that you can sort of coalesce rapid collaboration when there's RFAs, or there's something that merits that collaboration. So perhaps one of the things that we could also think about, not just in terms of specific projects, but how do we keep this blue sky type of collaboration going.
So these, sorry, the little tiny blue sky grants might be enough to get you to the point of putting in a seed grant somewhere. So
Yes.
Karen has a comment in the chat about another group, another exercise group. What I'm hearing though is possibility of something like program project grants, where you could go from basic animal studies to studies in people to implementation. You just have to choose your, are you focusing on cognitive benefits of exercise, or cardiovascular benefits of exercise, or diabetes, whatever. But I do wonder, there's enough breadth of expertise here that maybe we should be thinking across disciplines instead of within a discipline.
Yeah, I like the idea. I think physical activity being one of the core issue that impact various diseases, cardiovascular, eyes, and cancer, kidney. I'm hearing a lot of the connections here, and I think this could actually, if we could even think about a center activities where this kind of a physical activity center could really help us to coalesce and help us to collaborate and talk to each other to figure out how to get samples and understand the mechanisms.
So for that, I would just say you need someone who is willing to lead and sort of at least lead the beginning efforts. Because without that, it tends to die on the vine. So what is other thoughts or ideas or things that excite you that you heard? Just go ahead and jump in.
So I'm hearing VA and the Global Diabetes Center, at least and the physical therapy groups and the VA groups that are already doing a lot of these things. So are there any current funding opportunities that could actually help us to start to some collaborative activities? Once we work together and generate some data, then we could think about going for bigger grants.
When Joe put a few up in the beginning, that they're probably a little bigger than your then you're ready for. It's another year before the University Research Committee is, which handles the CTSA pilot grants. They're already underway, so it's another year before we have another round of that. Does anybody else know of any foundations or other places that have funded this kind of work?
Sarah, what about the Foundation for Physical Therapy? Because you got
Yeah.
one of your grants through there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough about the specifics. Usually it's focused on rehab,
Yeah,
but this kind of fits under that. I don't know how.
I think if there was a PT on it, that, you know, but it was a interdisciplinary team for sure.
Right.
And there's a digital health one that was more like 40K, and then larger 1 to 2 year grants that are around 100. I did see, I was just trying to look on my phone, a call from a Parkinson's foundation that
Yeah,
that
the
I'm
Finney
familiar
Foundation.
with. Pardon?
The Finney Foundation.
Was that it? I think so. The one with
Yeah,
exercise.
They
and
do a lot on
cognition?
exercise. Yeah.
Okay.
But they focus specifically, not that we couldn't do it, but they focus specifically on people with Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, yeah.
And we didn't bring that up here, but there is an investigator here at Emory, which many of you probably know, Madeline Hackney, who studies exercise and Parkinson's, among other diseases. Nancy, did you want to say something?
No, I was agreeing about Madeline. Very interesting work. I was thinking about there is an NIDDK workshop coming up, isn't it, in the summer? That, you know, that might be a source at least to pay attention to what priorities they're going to be stressing.
That's a good suggestion. And Felipe, the conference that you put in the chat, I've been trying to pay attention to what people are saying, so I haven't looked at your flyer, but do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, I didn't want to dominate the discussion, but obviously this is a group that may be interested in some aspects of this conference. So when you hear soccer, you think either injuries or high performance or, you know, kids, and that's included. But there is sort of like this movement that started in Denmark and has been getting a lot of traction around the world to use team sports, and particularly soccer, because a lot of the evidence is around soccer, to deliver interventions in pretty much any clinical population you can think of, from, you know, socially disadvantaged people to Parkinson's to kidney disease to all kinds of cancer to obviously diabetes and heart disease and obesity, pediatrics, bone health. So, you know, there's been these annual scientific conferences of this group that have been happening, and this is the first time that it leaves Europe, and it's going to be here at Emory in the first week in June. So it's a collaborative effort between the School of Nursing and the School of Public Health, and supported also by Caso Permanente. So we'll have, you know, fantastic speakers from different countries and talking about, again, different clinical populations, you know, their experience implementing these interventions, measuring aspects around, you know, some of it is basic science and omics, some of it is more, you know, implementation, some of it is more cognitive and behavioral aspects of the interventions. So, you know, the meeting is open to anyone that's interested from the health arena, but also we're looking to involve coaches. You know, it can be fitness coaches, it can be soccer coaches, because we, you know, eventually what we want to do is what Denmark has done, which is there's a national soccer for health program that is funded by the Danish Soccer Association and the Danish Heart Association. So there is after school programs for, you know, using soccer for health in kids. There is, soccer for, again, different clinical populations. Substitute soccer with other team sport, clearly there's other ways that we could do it in the US, but the idea here is to get people excited about a sport that maybe they used to play or they may be interested in, but they've never played, and have that be the delivery avenue for, health interventions. And so, everyone's invited. I think Jennifer also put the link there for the registration. It's June 7 to 9. June 7 is a pre-conference where we'll have the coaches and do an actual practical component of it, where we actually go into the soccer field and sort of show how you adapt a soccer intervention for, say, patients with prostate cancer or patients with, obesity or, pediatric populations. This is all recreational soccer, is, focused on health, on improving fitness, on the social aspect of it. Is not, slide tackles and all competition, although, you use that to the advantage of the group dynamics. And then on the 7th and the 8th and the 9th, we'll have, a day and a half of talks, and different, representatives from CDC, from US Soccer, from different organizations, talking about, the potential future of soccer for health in the US, and ideas to hopefully use the World Cup in 3 years in the US to sort of like generate more excitement and hopefully funding and interest to have sort of a health legacy for the US World Cup. So it's not just, stadiums that we build and, hopefully the team does well in the field, but that we could potentially have a health program that is a legacy associated with the US hosting the World Cup, just as it has happened in other countries. It happened in South Africa. It has happened in other countries, and we think that we could potentially do something similar. So happy to give you more details, and please help us disseminate and have your students and your colleagues come and join us.
Thank you. So 2 things. One question, and then I see Erica is back, and I'll let her talk for a minute about her work. Do any of you have funding from the CDC? That seems like a place that should be funding this sort of work.
The CDC has funding for more the implementation side of physical activity, but they have an interest in disparities, rural health. The physical activity branch is not well funded, traditionally has not been well funded. So typically what happens is that, you include physical activity as part of the, work you do for diabetes prevention or for obesity prevention or for, the cancer center. But, there is funding, and our, she's not here, but we have a CDC Prevention Research Center at Emory that that receives funding from CDC to focus on particularly rural health and cancer, but physical activity is part of what they do. That could be something to explore. Again, collaborations, there are special interest RFAs and things of that nature that we could potentially think about.
Okay, thank you. Erica, did you want to talk? You put a note in the chat about your schizophrenia study that was negative, which is too bad to hear, but do you want to say anything more about what you're doing?
Well, just in general, my research at the VA is centered on detailed phenotyping of people with schizophrenia, with a special emphasis on psychophysiology and cognition, and then a variety of lab assays. Recently, I've had an interest in inflammation and toxoplasma. I did do this study that was funded by the VA to try to improve cognition in people with schizophrenia with negative symptoms with aerobic exercise, and it did not work, unfortunately. So I did not pursue a follow-up study on that. But I'm interested in exercise through the portal of my interest in inflammation in schizophrenia and also in depression. So I'll just stop there for now. Thanks.
So Zara, I know you've had trouble with your audio, but I noticed you put in the chat.
Yes,
technology. Sounds like you're fixed now. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I didn't have a chance to introduce myself. So my name is Zara Baranduzi. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Emory University School of Nursing. So my research focuses on understanding the biopsychosocial mechanism of the symptoms. And the purpose of the symptom is the kind of treatment toxicities in cancer patients. So usually cancer patients, when receive the treatment, they suffer from various types of symptoms such as fatigue, pain, depression. So I'm trying to understand the mechanism of these symptoms and how I can manage them. So right now I'm interested in how to implement physical activity to manage these symptoms. But my question is that my population is cancer patients. So my question is how I can incorporate technology to design physical activity intervention to manage symptoms. Any idea would be appreciated.
I did hear somebody talk about wearables. Was it you, Joe?
Yeah, I've done some stuff with the wearables in our research with people with stroke and use them to measure activity levels and sleep.
I see. And because I look at the literature, I realize that using the specific type of apps to help participants to get involved in the physical activity is one of the technology. I'm not sure that the app is kind of technology, but we can call it as a technology. But for tracking the exercise using and various kind of physical activity trackers such as Fitbit. But other than this kind of technology, do you have any other suggestion to make the physical activity much more easier for people with chronic diseases?
That's a $64,000 question. So there's like the difference between tracking what they're doing and then using that data to then provide them real-time feedback on what they're doing to then try to change their behaviors. So there are some other, like I guess I might call quote unquote research grade activity monitors that are relatively more accurate and valid than something like the Fitbit or an app on your phone. There's starting to be more research on then how to use that to provide the feedback. Excuse me, but there isn't a lot on that yet. I mean, there is in some areas, but I don't think that's still kind of developing.
Yeah, and we've done a little bit of work in this area as well. We used the Apple Watch years ago. The idea was to track rural older adults for 2 weeks, and then based on their level of activity, assign them personalized exercise that would then be pushed to them through an app. One of the big hurdles that we ran into is just the amount of data that you get with these devices. It's really hard if you don't have a way to dashboard it and summarize it. It becomes a really big challenge to understand and it's just so much data. So obviously those things are getting better, but it depends kind of what system you're in, how you're receiving the data. This was a Office of Rural Health grant through the VA, so we were a little bit challenged with what we were allowed to receive and send out from a data standpoint. But I think that some of those issues changed with COVID and became a little bit more feasible, but it's still the right device, and how you're using that information, then how you're trying to personalize the intervention really depends on the population, the question, and there's just no good answer, I would say, at this point.
Yeah, because one of the challenges is, as Joe was saying, you can give them a lot of information, but we did one small study. Just giving them the information doesn't really do anything. You have to pair it with some behavioral interventions, support to help them change their behaviors. And so it's more than just, providing them with an app or some type of monitor and then letting them kind of go wild.
Yeah, that's sort of my experience. Well, we've tried to do this at Emory in the adult clinic, and we've done a few pilot studies using wearables that we provide to patients, as well as asking patients to share the data of the wearable they already own, or even the data collected by their cell phone. And again, try to dashboard it and use that to generate physical activity counseling. And there's mixed results. Some people are much better at sort of sharing the data and then getting it data feedback and acting upon it, but it doesn't it's not a one size fits all. Even though people may be interested in their wearable data, they may not be necessarily good candidates for a fully remote technology enabled intervention. Sometimes people just need human connection or exercising with others, whether it's their family or friends or whatever. So my experience is that there are a lot of examples of successful interventions using wearable data to measure and or provide feedback interventions, but none of those have been scaled because you end up having sort of like subgroups of people that just want different things. Now, having said that, companies like Peloton and others in the exercise fitness arena have had success using technology to promote physical activity, and maybe that's something that we could explore. Collaborating with them to understand, from a research perspective, what are the sweet spots for populations or for clinical groups or for intervention strategies that can be then used in a more holistic way, not just buying a $4,000 Peloton bike, which is great, and I have one and it helps, but obviously not everyone is going to have access to one of those.
All right, we have about 50.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad we finally got to hear you, Sarah. Couldn't get you before. We have about 15 minutes left. I want to at least discuss what Sarah put in the chat, and then we need to talk about how you would like to continue this or not, or if you've heard enough and you already have people you want to contact through that, that's fine too. But Sarah, do you want to expand on your idea that you put in the chat?
Oh, I just was, as we look at the multiple variables that influence physical activity and thinking of some of the push to understand marginalized communities and what limits access, it's really having this broader understanding of all the various influences, whether they're family, social, or just access to the natural environment. And so, I've been pondering about what the climate group has been doing, and then some of the work that we've been starting exploring sustainability within PT, and just thinking again, I guess, of how do we incorporate. I just have a lot of work I need to do on my own end to understand, but it does feel like ways, just interesting around accessibility, and what does accessibility look like, whether it's a natural environment or built environment, or and what are the various factors beyond just personal ones that impact health behaviors.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I think Felipe also alluded to it.
Yeah.
The dynamic that we have a really hard time understanding, but we know it's a really key ingredient to the success of many of our interventions is that they're in nature, they're group exercise. So people come together and they're going through something similar, whether maybe it's Parkinson's disease or mild cognitive impairment. And they just start to establish these relationships, and they exercise together, and then they go out and get coffee. And I think that obviously helps with adherence, but that dynamic, whether you're talking about team sport, I think it's something that really is hard to quantify and understand exactly what it's doing, but it's something that is important to be leveraged, I think, and really allow for people to come together and work through and exercise, and there's a competitive nature to it. But then that also brings in, the family, right? So it could be a caregiver if it's somebody that would be benefit from just having a program that's implemented through the house, can a caregiver, a spouse, a sibling or somebody be there with them? I think that's something that needs to be explored and understood better, because our interventions where we try to individualize them and they're kind of done on their own just don't take as well as the ones where it's a group component.
And, and if I'm going to give someone a walking program to do at home to carry over from what you're doing in the group, if they don't have sidewalks and I don't really take advantage, into consideration where they live, then I think for me, that was a big draw of understanding more about some of the work around sustainability and climate. And it also feels like an opportunity to think about the methodology behind how you approach it. And it's ripe for using participatory action research to that kind of collaborative engagement with the participants and for their input around what their preferences are from the beginning and how they can address their own health behaviors in their community.
Well, thank you all for participating in this. So the last few minutes we usually spend talking about how to move forward, and different groups do different things. So sometimes it's enough to have just met and talked to people in the group, and we'll see follow-ups individually afterwards. Sometimes there's a big idea that people want to follow up on. Sometimes the group would just like to meet again in a few months, or with a slightly different format where people actually present their research. I'd say with this group, you had a span of basic scientists who are maybe looking for some clinical collaborators. You have a good group of implementation scientists here. So there's lots of ways you could go forward with this. So I'd just like to hear from you what you think next steps are for this group, or whether this is enough, and we'll move on to another topic with another group in the future. We'll do that anyway, but.
Well, I kind of feel like well, first of all, thanks for organizing this. And I feel like I've been exposed to a group of people who are doing research that several of them I didn't know existed here in the metro area. And so that's great. I guess I'd like to get a better feel for what exercise regimens or overall exercise programs the group's doing with human subjects research. And I know, for instance, Joe and I sometimes struggle in recruitment issues. We struggle sometimes in delivering, say, in our case, the stationary bicycles and how we monitor that. And we sometimes struggle with coordinating all it takes to, for instance, do the exercise, but also get, say, blood sampling done. Sometimes it's various projects gets to be kind of intricate. So where I'm going with this, I guess, is another meeting where folks who are doing human subjects research can just give us very brief outlines, maybe 5 minutes of here's how we're working with humans. Here's how we bring them in, or here's how we contact them and exercise with them remotely, that sort of thing. I'm not saying that's the only thing I'm interested in, but it's something that really piqued my interest because I didn't realize that the number of different projects that are going on here that I just know nothing about.
What do others think? So at the very least, we can send you a group text of everyone who was here, not text, email of everyone who is here, so that you can pick out who you want to connect with, and we can leave it to you in the future. If you like Jeff's idea of coming together to talk about exercise regimens, we're happy to help you organize that meeting. One of you would have to lead it. I do a lot of these groups, and I can't continue to be a facilitator for each future group, so you'd have to kind of take it over on your own. But thoughts?
Kathy, I'm wondering if the CTSA has done something related to sort of the very basic sort of step of by research area or interest group to just have a listserv or to have a website where you, or a Google page or spreadsheet where you have people across the CTSA organizations and what they're working on, sort of like essentially a database of contacts that someone can at least have access to, because obviously that's for grants and for research ideas and putting things in place. That's one of the main rate limiting factors when there is not a center that already does that.
Right. So we have something called CTSA Match, which is a database where you enter your interests, and the program will actually match you with other people who have similar interests. So Lauren or Gray, if you could put the link to CTSA, she's ahead of me there. She already put it in the chat. The database is only as good as the number of people who have entered their information. So we actually try to ask our Blue Sky groups to enter their information there so you can find other people. Program's not perfect. Sometimes you need to browse a little bit to find collaborators. Sometimes it matches you with people and you say, what is it that we have in common? But it's a good platform to start those sorts of things.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm not hearing a lot of enthusiasm for moving forward, but we're going to send you an email summarizing this group, and you'll see everybody's name in the email list, and you can reach out individually. And Jeff, if you can convince anybody to go forward with your idea, we're happy to help organize the meeting.
Okay, thanks.
All right, and I want to especially thank Joe and Felipe for kind of leading this for us and getting us started on the discussion. I thought it was some of this research is really fascinating. So thank you all for sharing what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and I think hopefully some of you reach out. I'm always interested in collaborations, Jeff. I also like your idea. So if folks want to talk about how they successfully implement exercise, I'd be happy to meet there as well. And Felipe, thanks for hosting this with me.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me, and CTSA for helping organize this. I think these are, just as a learning what others are doing is useful, and often projects come out of this. So, I don't want to be cynical. I want to be, I think we need to, be strategic about, if there are RFAs or there are, ideas that we could potentially collaborate, use that, in a pragmatic way. And hopefully this email list can also help, jumpstart something bigger that can be sort of like a database that someone maintains.
We will follow up with you in 3 to 6 months and just ask if any collaborations have come out of this. Please do answer that, because it gives us a justification for going on with these groups or not. And we do have to report that to the NIH. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good to see you all.
Thank you.